in my opinion, one of the most passive forms of real estate ownership out there. So, I mean, we don't have property management.
Hello and welcome to Pillars of Wealth Creation, where we talk about creating financial success with a special focus on business and real estate. I'm your host, Todd Dexheimer. Now, let's get to it. Hello and welcome back to Pillars of Wealth Creation. I'm your host, Todd Dexheimer. With me, excited to have Neil Wahlgren. Neil, how are you doing today?
Doing great, Todd. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I appreciate you joining us. And a little bit about Neil. He comes from a military background. So he was life as a military pilot in aviation. So we'll have to talk a little bit about flying a plane. That sounds really fun. Did you fly the plane, or were you, what part of that were you?
I was a pilot. Yeah.
Yeah. You were the pilot. Okay, sweet. So you did that, and then embarked on a new career path in entrepreneurship and real estate. So Neil really knows how to step out of his comfort zone, how to push it, how to go into the unknown. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. And we're going to talk about a topic that we don't talk a lot about on this show. I've had a couple of guests, but I think Neil's going to bring some different excitement into that too. So we're going to talk a lot about the commercial real estate, and he's going to talk to us about different strategies and that. So I think that's really cool because we hear mostly from multifamily people, some single family people. So, so with that said, Neil, you've done a lot of different things. Take us through kind of your background and then what your focus is today.
Yeah. No, thanks for the intro there. Ultimately Bay Area native, grew up just outside of San Francisco. Ended up wanting out of the suburban life as a 18-year-old. So ended up going to the Air Force Academy and then flew the C-130 Hercules for about just shy of 10 years, full time with the Air Force. And then
Nice.
a couple more years, actually in the Navy. So did the whole switch over, same plane, better looking uniforms, and just a little bit of a change of pace.
Did you ever get to take off of a ship?
No. So the C-130, some funny trivia. The C-130, they've done it once, and it was in the 50s, and they did some basically early airframe trials, and they took one out there, but it turns out it can only land and take off on a carrier if it's pretty much empty, which isn't super practical for a cargo plane. Yeah. So they decided, we'll stick to land here after that.
Perfect. That's cool. That it looks like really fun to take off of a ship and to land.
Right.
Probably a little nerve wracking the first couple times you do it. But, it looks like a little bit of fun. I don't think I'll be probably experiencing that in my lifetime,
but probably not me either. But we had some fun stuff. A notable spot is I actually got to land on Rota, which is an island just off of Guam, ROTA, and they have a crushed coral runway. Just wow. the ingredient that is found plentiful on the island, and the entire runway it's blisteringly white. And when the sun hits it, I mean, you got to wear like 2 sets of sunglasses, but you can actually land a plane on crushed coral. So
that was pretty cool.
A fun time.
That's good. So from military then full-time to what was the next step? Was it immediately into entrepreneurship?
Yeah, I mean, a form of it. So I wanted out of the, kind of big government, big military side, and the whole idea of flying commercial, Delta from Oakland to Omaha didn't really move the needle in terms of, kind of what I wanted on a personal level from a, career perspective, I guess you could say. So yeah. I kind of took the plunge in the opposite direction and joined a startup, as all people craving something new should try at least once in their life. And yep. It was neat though. It was a renewable energy startup down in SoCal. I was working business development. We had this effectively this pathway of converting plant and wood waste into renewable fuels and this black carbon-based material called biochar that I was working business development in to work with growers and horticulturists and soil blenders to really find economic ways to incorporate this into, really different forms of agriculture and horticulture.
Interesting. Interesting.
So
And then from there, was it then into
yeah,
the real estate?
yeah. The company ended up running out of funding,
Yeah.
and it was a good time to effectively move back up to the NorCal, where I'd been wanting to head back for some time. Got a place in the city in San Francisco, and somewhat by chance, connected with the husband of a family friend that we had had for a long time, who had built up really this equity focused commercial real estate investment firm. It was a small group, about 8 or 9 people. But ultimately, the model was bring equity and bring investor relationships in a partnership form to JV with operators or developers who typically had a skill set or were growing faster than their organic equity could kind of fund deals. So we were effectively the investor arm on a JV basis, project by project, with a number of different specialist operators. So we
Gotcha.
had one group, for instance, that just did Class B multifamily turnarounds in Northeast Atlanta. We had another one that did multi-tenant retail in Dallas Fort Worth. Another one that did senior assisted living in the Northern California areas. So these very specific specialties that we would effectively partner and leverage that experience.
That's interesting. Yeah. I mean, you see kind of some of that, but I love that little business niche right there to
Yeah.
partner, especially because they're partnering with specific areas, specific geographical areas, companies that are
Hmm.
focused on different things. And so you're really diversifying, yet you're diversifying in a way where you're not just spreading yourself too thin because you're partnering
Yep.
with experts in that, diversification
In those
class. So that's
different
pretty cool.
projects.
Yeah.
Yeah. The longer I've been in real estate, I'm coming up on, I guess, 7 or 8 years now. That the more time I've spent in it, the more time I believe, being a specialist is more important than being a generalist.
Yeah.
And, find something, specialize in it, and then find what you don't do well, and partner or bring someone to the table that can kind of fill that need in
I
a
agree.
very effective way.
100% agree. I used to want to do everything, thought, oh, I'm going to own multifamily and industrial and retail and office and
Yeah,
self storage and all this kind of stuff. And I'm going to have it all. And now I kind of do, but I partner, do the same type of thing. I
exactly.
partner with the right people. And, I was telling you before, I mean, we're going to be taking down some different commercial space than we've never taken down before, but we're partnering
Yep.
very strategically with the right people. And I think that's so important. So yeah, that's cool. So, um, so did you work for this person then?
Yeah. So we worked for him. Ended up starting off in operations, and after 4 years, was actually fully running the company. So had really progressed quickly on that side, and it was neat because our specialty was raising money for the right deals, but also being able to underwrite the deals. Look under the hood, understand the pro formas, the
Yeah.
underwriting, the assumptions,
Yeah.
more so understanding the teams that we were working with. And through that process, one of the groups we worked with kind of in the early stage of their growth trajectory was Mag Capital Partners. And, really, I love the team. I love the model, and their specialty. Well, now I can say our specialty, because I had a chance to join full time about 2.5 years ago, is really single tenant, net leased industrial real estate. So a very specific niche. These are operational real estate manufacturing tenants in the Midwest, and a very, kind of repeatable, specific investment niche that we've carved out and, in my opinion, do quite well.
All right. So single tenant, net leased. Explain that so our listeners understand what exactly that means. And you're talking in the industrial space.
Sure. So just to, maybe from a comparative basis, I know a lot of your listeners have experience, say, in multifamily. So I'll do a little, back and forth comparison when we look at how this industrial space maybe differs, and how it's the same in a lot of ways from the multifamily side.
Perfect.
In the multifamily side, an investor or an investment group is going to, effectively, you have money coming in through rents, and then you have a somewhat complicated set of expenses. And those expenses, everything from, utility copays to taxes to insurance, all these things are the responsibility of the investment group typically, because you're not going to be able to get your renters to pay for their own, share of the property tax, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
On the industrial side, it's different. In the industrial side, the norm is, especially for a single tenant property, when you have a single manufacturing firm, is the way the leases are structured, they're absolute triple net. And what that means is the tenant is going to pay their own property taxes directly. They're going to pay their own insurance on the property, and that includes deductibles and premiums. They're going to pay their own utilities. And even one step further, they're going to pay their own building upkeep and maintenance. So that even a roof replacement, for instance, the tenant's going to pay for their own roof. They're going to pay for any expansions. They're going to pay for concrete repairs, new paint, heating and air. Literally, nearly every expense associated with owning that real estate is going to be paid by your tenant through that structure of an absolute triple net lease.
So we're talking triple net, like to the fullest. They are basically owners of the building without owning the real estate. They're paying everything.
Absolutely.
I'm assuming would they pay for the whole roof, or do you prorate that, or how does that work? Let's say the roof is already 10 years old and so year 20, 10 years later, the roof needs to be replaced. Are they paying for the whole thing, or would they pay for half of it?
They're paying for the whole thing, but you have to look at the term of the lease, right? We're typically signing 20-year leases, usually with 2 10-year extensions. So, these companies really, as long as their business model works, these are typically mission critical locations for the tenants. Mm-hmm. And their intention by signing that long-term lease, by accepting the responsibilities that come with that triple net factor, they are really indicating both, through their operational decisions and through their contractual ones, that they plan to stay in that location, continue producing whatever it is they're producing for the long haul there.
How easy is it for them to get out of the lease?
Nearly impossible. But that's, really it's a two-way street, right? And so the way we're acquiring these properties is through sale leaseback. So typically we are buying real estate from owner-occupied sellers. So effectively, imagine you have a company making widgets for the automotive industry, right?
Yeah.
If this company, we'll call it Widgets Incorporated, Widgets operates and produces widgets in this piece of real estate, and they own the building as well, right? What typically will happen is, as a form of refinancing, as a form of effectively drawing out capital, sometimes these widget companies will sell the real estate. We will negotiate the price of that building, and then simultaneously we will negotiate the terms of a brand new long-term triple net lease. So that lease is really the securitization centered around the value of that real estate that they just sold to us. And so for that reason, it needs to be very, very tight contractually to allow basically us to have the security of that cash flow, the security of that yield, which is why we bought the real estate at that price to begin with.
Gotcha. And so it's typically a tenant that's already there. They've got an established business. They've maybe been running it for 5, 10, maybe even longer. Mm-hmm. But now they need some sort of capital infusion. They're expanding, they develop something new, whatever it might be. Is that typically what's going on?
Yeah, it can be for a lot of different reasons.
Yeah.
There's benefits on a sale leaseback side, a number of balance sheet reasons, favorable tax treatment, as opposed to taking a mortgage on real estate you own. A mortgage, you're only going to be able to basically, take debt roughly to about 70% of the value of that real estate. If you do a sale leaseback, you can get 100%. And quite often it's tied
opens
with
up some credit too.
It does, yeah. And on a balance sheet perspective, a mortgage counts as a long-term liability. A long-term lease obligation is viewed differently on that balance sheet. Item.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. So, there's a number of reasons why they do it, but effectively, usually it boils down to they believe they have a higher and greater source of use for those funds tied up in the real estate that they can reinvest into the company, basically to get a better internal ROI on those funds.
Yeah, and a lot of companies do this. This isn't just like your mom and pop business that's like, oh, we need some cash right
Yeah,
now. There's a lot of big companies that do this. Same
exactly.
type of thing.
Yep. Yeah. And they form it. I mean, really, we view it as a form of alternative financing. So they are, viewing this as one of several different tools in their toolkit on how to, whether they take out lines of credit, whether they take on, new mortgages, corporate debt, they all have their pros and cons. And this is just one other tool that they can use to further grow the company in a way that makes sense for them.
So what's your management then? So what you got this property, you negotiated everything, everything's all set, right?
Yeah.
We have the lease term signed, we're all good. And now it's operations time. What
Yep.
is your company's job for operations? Because it's triple net. What do you do?
Yeah, it's in my opinion one of the most passive forms of real estate ownership out there. So, I mean, we don't have property management. I mean, the biggest thing that we're doing is monitoring continued tenant credit. So, there's most of the work on these deals is done long in advance of ever buying it. So, you're negotiating purchase and sale agreements, you're negotiating the lease. I mean, that process can take 6 months very commonly. And you're doing a very deep dive into the credit worthiness of the tenant, because that effectively is your securitization on that cash flow from the lease. So, and then once we own it, typically the terms of that lease will require the tenant to submit quarterly financial statements to us. So we actually have an internal credit team, and we are reviewing the ongoing effectively credit flow of that company. We're saying, hey, are they growing? If they're growing, are they doing it in a sustainable way? Are revenues dropping, or are they, losing profitability? If so, we watch for trends. And if it continues a little bit, then we have the ability from a management side to kind of come in, start a conversation early, start looking at, hey, what's going on? And, start looking at really options before we get pinned against a wall, with just a notice of default. So, and I will caveat, we've been fortunate in our corporate, in our company's history, coming up on 7 years, we've never lost a tenant. We've never had a tenant default on a lease. So really these are high private credit tenants with strong credit histories in a way that, has proven successful for the business model.
When you had, if you had it, you haven't, but let's just say we go through a big, huge recession and
Sure.
a few of these tenants struggle, and what's your recourse? Is there something written in the lease that says if you don't maintain certain financials that we can just boot you?
Yeah. So, I mean, the only way a tenant can legally get out of a lease is under either Chapter 11 or Chapter 7 bankruptcy. So, basically a judge has to effectively give them permission to contractually get out of that lease contract. So, one of the most important parts about the due diligence piece on this asset class is not only looking for strong tenant credit, but it's also looking at unit level profitability. And what I mean by that is, typically most of our tenants have multiple locations, right? So we are buying one location across, sometimes a dozen, sometimes, close to 100 locations. So equally important to the credit of that tenant is your unit level financials. And here's the reason why is if a tenant starts hurting overall and goes into Chapter 11, Chapter 11 is not an end all be all. Chapter 11 is a reorganization under protection of a effectively judicial stewardship, right? And so during that process, they're going to look at all their assets, all their liabilities. And when it comes to locations, they're going to say, these ones are making us money and these ones are not, right? And the ones that are not, they're going to find ways to get out of those leases, break the contracts. But the ones that are making the money, they're absolutely going to hang on to. And those lease contracts are going to stay intact. So that really is our first thing that we look at, even before we look at the overall creditworthiness of the tenant.
Yeah. So if you've got a location that you purchased in Dallas, say, and they're doing really well there, you feel strongly, and the chapter 11 happens, they might break their lease in St. Louis, but in Dallas, they're going to keep it because they're strong. And that's what you're looking at.
Exactly, yeah. And in most Chapter 11s, we've never had a tenant go into it, but we have had some who have had them in the past. And, we look at the locations that we're buying, we'll make sure that those, even if they went through a Chapter 11, that they hung on to those. Exactly. Because we look for profit centers on a unit level basis, because that, at the end of the day, we are buying one piece of real estate or one, finite portfolio of real estate. We want to make sure that those are profit centers for the tenants.
Let's talk. What type of like basis? What are you coming in buying these at cap rate wise? Yeah. Is there value add that typically happens, or is it pretty cut and dry right from the start? It sounds like it's pretty cookie cutter.
Great questions. So in the single tenant net lease space, the cap rate and the perceived versus actual risk are all tied to what type of tenant. So in general, the two main categories are public credit and private credit. So your public credits, say you have an Amazon or a Walmart or Home Depot, like these are big spaces. Your odds of these tenants defaulting are effectively as near zero as you could probably get. However, the flip side is, because of that low risk and because they have a public credit rating, your yield is going to be much lower. You're going to buy these at a 4 or 5 cap. Your cash flow is going to be, 3-4% a year. And, that's the corresponding yield from an investment like that. We play in a space of private credit. So we actually analyze the credit of these tenants in-house. We have a 3-man team. All they do is analyze credit, look at balance sheets, financial statements, but more so they are interviewing the executive team, the CFO. They're looking at debt loads, who the creditors are, who the stakeholders are, how they're going to use the proceeds from a sale leaseback, what the financial picture will look like, on the flip side once the transaction's complete. And we actually create a credit memo for each of these investments. But in this space, we're able to, from our perspective, capture some of the value between actual and perceived risk of these private credit companies. So we're buying, typically 7.5 cap. Cash flow is going to be, high single digits during the hold, 8, 9, 10% a year. And then, we'll hold for typically about 5 years. When we sell, similar to a multifamily investment, we do return of capital plus all profits generated through appreciation. We do a profit split check at the end. And, all in full cycle, I think we've exited about 15 deals and, averaged high teens in terms of average annual returns on those.
Yeah. And that's really, I would call that really good for the low risk type of investment you're doing.
Yeah, they're different. And, the way I like to explain it, especially compared to, say, a multifamily turnaround, a multifamily, you're buying it and then your work's just getting started, right? Then you're putting that team or maybe you're still building a team to work. You're doing usually capital improvements, new countertops, new cabinets, with the goal that you think you can increase rents, you think you can increase occupancy and effectively turn an underperforming asset into, a strong performer. These are different. These are defensive plays. So most of the work is done up front and you have full occupancy. You have full cash flow coming in from day one. You have built-in rent bumps in the lease. Every year that the rent goes up, usually about 2%, and that gets, basically flows down to our investor group. Yep. And so really these are protection plays. We have a cash flowing asset from day one that's cash flowing nicely. And we really are just hopefully positioning ourselves in a way that continues in the way, that it has been historically. And for the, roughly 5 years, we plan to own the real estate.
Gotcha. So you're keeping it for about 5 years. That's the goal.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's intentional.
And then you're selling it to somebody else that wants to take over because it's a long-term lease.
Yep.
So
there's still 15 years on the lease when we sell it.
Yeah. So still got
tons of time on it. Yeah. A lot of value left on it. Exactly.
Yeah, a lot of value there. That's cool. How are you finding these? Like, are these listed by brokers, or are you digging them up yourselves? How are you finding these sale leaseback?
Yeah. So the majority of sale leaseback go through kind of a relatively small network of sale leaseback commercial brokers. So, on a national level, honestly, there's probably less than 2 dozen, kind of competent players
On
in
a
this space.
national level?
Yeah, who have specialty of being
Wow.
able to do sale leaseback transactions. So
Wow.
it's a small group of people that, there's probably five, or, just to use an example, you'll have, large, take a NAI or CBRE, or, one of these big brokerage firms, they will have maybe, team of 3 or 4 maximum who specialize in sale leaseback, so they have massive teams for buying and selling stabilized assets. But the sale leaseback side, it's a bit more of an art in terms of the structure of the deal that kind of requires, really an in-depth specialty knowledge for being able to do that transaction. So to be
Mhm.
able to convey the benefits to a potential seller of why why it might be beneficial to them to take a tenant role. And then also, you're not just negotiating price, you're negotiating price and lease terms. And what's kind of neat about it is those can kind of flow in a way that works best for the seller and the buyer. Just to use an example,
Hmm.
if the seller wants to maximize the proceeds of the sale, I can go, sure. In return, you're going to pay on the high end of market rent on your lease. Or let's say they say, hey, I'm looking for, kind of a low lease obligation. I want to pay low rent for the next 20 years. We say, okay, I'll put a, maybe a below market lease in there, a lease rate, but correspondingly, I'm going to want to buy this at a, bottom of the market price. And so those two kind of levers can move. Both can result in the yield that my investors are looking for, and they can help serve the needs of the seller who's staying with me. We have a relationship because that seller's becoming my tenant. So they're really, I think there's a lot more alignment in this transaction, kind of an incentive for people to play nice, for people to have a fair deal, because ultimately you're staying in that relationship for the next 5 years minimum, if not more.
Do you decide how long you're going to keep it based on what you negotiate? Because I would think it would make more sense to, if you, let's say you negotiate a really low sales price, it makes sense to probably sell it within, 3 to 5 years. Where if you negotiate a low or a high sales price, but a high cash flow, it probably makes more sense to keep that thing for seven
Yeah,
or 10 years, maybe
it's
even.
really case by case, but
Yeah.
we'll typically try to negotiate for longer term when we can. Just, ultimately we'd rather leave a little money on the table but have the security of a longer term lease. And it's just kind of the business model that we've built. But
Yeah.
for us, it comes down to options, right?
Yeah.
I would like, in general, these deals keep a pretty strong premium as long as you're selling with more than roughly 10 years on the term. So, my target is a 15-year remaining term when I sell. But you know what? If the market's in the tank, say 5 years from now, I've got 10-year fixed rate debt. I've got options. I can hold another 2, 3, 4 years if I need to, still be able to sell comfortably, not have to worry about refinancing. So really, I mean, it gives us more flexibility as an investment group in terms of timing the market truly when, the optimal time is to sell there.
That's cool. So, Neil, you've been into some, I would call some pretty cool, kind of exciting companies. You were in a startup, which is obviously kind of fun to be a part of. You watched that business ultimately. Were you part of it when they ended up shutting down? Were you still part of it?
I was in the
The,
final
the
months
move out
there.
phase.
Exactly. Yeah. So
So I
I
mean,
was employee number 40. We went to 300 and then to zero. So
and then to zero. Yeah. I mean, so you're part of that. That's really cool. You were part of this private equity company, and now you're part of this single tenant sale leaseback company. So you've been involved in some really, in my opinion, some pretty cool companies. So you've likely learned some valuable lessons along the way. I want to be able to dive in and dig into some of those valuable lessons that you've learned. What are some Like, give me maybe like 2 or 3 kind of big lessons that you've learned that, um, let's do this. I want to take this 2 ways. Okay. I want to know, let's talk about a couple mistakes that you've seen, maybe you've made, even been a part of. Let's talk about a couple mistakes that you've seen these companies make that, um, have been issues, and maybe how have you learned from those? And then we'll go the opposite way. So let's do the mistake first. I want to
Sure.
know what are a couple things. You don't have to name the company. What are a couple things that you've seen that have gone sideways?
Yeah. In general, I think there's this maybe social pressure to grow and to broaden the scope of your company's operations. And, I've seen it in several different scenarios, everything from the military to, the startup world. And, I think one of the biggest pitfalls I've seen is when companies take what they're doing well and rather than really, kind of double down on it and kind of grow organically around this core feature that they have, to kind of echo what we talked about before, try to grow and expand and basically take on, a huge amount of additional scope for their business model that, if it's done too quickly, I think, or kind of arbitrarily where it doesn't really drive value to your core specialty, I think that's when you run into problems and you get spread too thin. You're no longer an expert in all these, additional auxiliary fields. And, suddenly one of the biggest things is you lose the confidence of your customers. Your customers that used to see you as an expert in what you did now are like, well, they do a lot of stuff, they're not great at any of them. And I think that to me is one of the, driving motivators, at MAG to really, to keep our focus extremely tight. We're doing it well. We have, strong performance in our portfolio. And, there's tons of shiny objects or squirrels, if you will, to go chase in the real estate world. And, oh, wouldn't it be fun to do this or that? And it probably would be fun, but you run the risk of diluting your specialty there. And I think, from an investor side and from a customer side, people see an incredible amount of value when you have the focus to stay in your lane and the focus to do that specialty extremely well and better than anyone else in the market.
Yeah, that's really valuable. Very easy, like you said, to chase that shiny object or to go after the squirrel.
Oh yeah. And don't get me wrong, I'm tempted all the time, right?
Yeah.
You see these fun things. And the other day we got into an internal discussion about tokenization of real estate investing. It was fascinating, right? But at the end of the day, I think it might be a little premature for to start taking Bitcoin on basically multi-investor equity funding. But it's good to know what's out there without necessarily jumping in with 2
Yeah.
feet on any brand new idea that comes out there.
Yeah. And if you're really wanting to chase the shiny object, as we've already said, find the people that are already doing that
There you go.
and
Yep.
then invest with or partner with them
Yeah.
instead of trying
Leverage
to
that
do it yourself.
expertise.
Leverage that expertise.
Yeah, or maybe acquire them, or
Or
there's a lot
acquire
of
them.
ways that
Yeah.
you can pull in that expertise without necessarily having to go through all the learning
Yeah.
stumbles to get there, right?
Yeah. Cool. So on the same kind of token, I mean, we talked about the mistake and obviously how do you not do that? Let's talk about some of the, I don't know, some of the strategies or some of the things that you take from these companies that say, wow, this is how you become successful. What are a couple things that you can give to us? This is why this company's successful. These
Yeah.
are their habits. This is what they do.
I've actually found over the years, I've been able to take a lot more from the flying world into investing and
Mm.
startup life than I ever expected to. And so, before I jump into your question there, in the flying world, I was flying a multi-crew aircraft. We had a crew of about 6 or 7, depending on the configuration of a bunch of different experts. We had, two pilots, a navigator, a flight engineer, load masters, systems experts, weapons officers, all this stuff that really not only did you have to fly the plane as a pilot, but you were also the aircraft commander, effectively kind of a project manager of all these different skill sets working in harmony to effectively get the mission done. And the way we would do this very well is that, extremely tight adherence to checklists and to repeatability. And that repeatability comes from in my opinion, the inherent mistakes and errors that you will make as a team when you're doing things ad hoc and changing quite often. And what's neat about the investment space is I find if you structure it right and you really set up a repeatable system for yourself, to kind of use that E-Myth example you mentioned earlier. I love that book, by the way. And just to set up repeatability and systems, you're able to, in my opinion, remove a huge amount of operational risk that you might not even realize you would have taken on as a team by, kind of having this chaotic ensemble dance, to get to the outcome each time. And that, really, flying is designed to remove as much predictable known risk as possible. You're still going to have risk in every time you take the plane in the air. And of course, combat is a whole nother variable, but you can remove, things like a weather review, things like, systems adherence, making sure you're operating the plane right, making sure different crew positions are interacting in a predictable, proven way. And I've tried to carry over as many of those systems and consistencies from that world to the investment space as possible. So we have a lot of checklist discipline, if you will. And, every deal, we kind of start from the top and we work our way down and we check off each item to make sure we're getting them in time. And, in my opinion, we're able to reduce a lot of the operational risk of putting together a deal by doing that.
Yeah, I love it, man. That's great. It's funny how you can relate some of the earlier experience, flying a plane.
Yeah.
What's it really got to do with business, right? But then you start to really break it down and go, oh yeah, a lot of the stuff is kind of the same.
Yeah. A huge amount of carryover.
Yeah. It's amazing. So that's cool. Man, I could keep going with a lot of questions that I have for you, but we should probably kind of start to wrap up here. What's a favorite book that you can give to our listeners?
I don't necessarily have favorites, but I'm reading one right now that I enjoy. It's called Why We Sleep. It's by a guy, Matthew, I forgot his last name, but Matthew something, Why We Sleep. And I've always found sleep science fascinating because of how impacted on a personal basis I am when I get good rest versus not. And, the whole circadian rhythm flying thing has always been, a strong influence in my life. I still travel quite often, different time zones, and really understanding to a kind of a scientific level of how and why your body sleeps the way it does, I found directly improves the, basically output of my waking hours in a very noticeable way. So I enjoy it. So I would highly recommend it to anyone who's interested in what happens in that third of your life that, your eyes are shut and, what is your body doing that and how does that affect your waking hours?
Yeah, it's amazing when you don't get enough sleep. It's almost like you've had a few too many to drink, right? I mean, you said
100%.
to me, it's not, maybe it's not exactly the same, but it's like you're just foggy in your brain. It's just like you're getting buzzed. It's like seriously, and I've noticed it more in myself. Like as I'm getting older, I need my sleep. Like I have to have my sleep, and if I don't, I'm just not productive like I should be.
Yeah.
I would equate it to, it's almost like you're having a few too many to drink.
No, I agree. My wife got me this Fitbit recently, and so I'm not being paid by Fitbit, but but I like it. It's a little smartwatch here, and it gives you an objective score, and it actually breaks down the different levels of your circadian rhythm throughout the night. and it'll show how much deep sleep, how much REM sleep, how much light sleep, how much time awake. And it's fascinating to see. And then to kind of match that with how you feel. I mean, it's very close. So I've been experimenting with that over the last few months, and really, it's a good motivator for me to go to bed. Say no to that last Netflix episode, and just say, you know what, I'm going to do better tomorrow with an extra 42 minutes here. But
Yep. I'm not going to check Facebook before I go to bed. Like, I'm just going to go to bed. I need to go. That's good.
Easier said than done sometimes.
Yeah, definitely. How do you like to give back?
A lot of my time goes honestly into my kid. Trying to work kind of through that portal, if you will, working with other kids, other parents. He's at that age right now where that's taken a lot of my, we'll call it auxiliary energy.
How old is your kid?
He's 9. So
okay.
he's a good kid, growing up in the city here, but, we try to match, city stuff with, we do this, it's called FUF. It's a weird acronym, but Friends of the Urban Forest. So we plant trees on the weekends when we can out here in San Francisco, and, find ways to try to do something that doesn't directly benefit you personally. And, whether it's volunteerism or parks or, just spending time with a cause outside of yourself. And, I think that's been a good focus both for him and, indirectly myself recently.
That's cool. All right, man. Well, last question before we wrap up. What would be your 3 pillars of wealth creation? And just to kind of clarify that, because everybody gets confused what I mean. And I mean really in any way. So you can come up with the physical things, that deal with wealth, or you could come up with the more of the philosophical. So either way, but what are your 3 pillars of wealth creation?
I would say the first one is going to be a more direct, and that's going to be cash flow. Cash flow, when you focus on cash flow, and I'm going to expand that to be, really any sort of performing asset, an asset that is working for you today at some level, even if it's just, a minuscule amount. If it's producing a net benefit and not a net debt or liability in your life, whether it be a financial investment or a friendship or anything like that, I think that is probably the number one thing I look for in terms of where I invest time and energy into. The second one, I'd say something that's interesting to you. I don't know. It's really hard for me to stay dedicated to something that I'm not personally stimulated by or engaged by or driven by. You could do something that you're supposed to like. I could eat kale all day long because I hate kale. I'm just not going to eat it. And if
good for you, but I don't care.
Exactly right. And you have to. I mean, there's enough ways that you can invest in yourself financially, personally, all these levels. Right. Find something that you like. And if you don't, pivot and just say, you know what, I tried this. I just genuinely don't like this. And that's okay. And recognize it and move on to something that you do genuinely enjoy. And then, the third piece, let's see, pillars of wealth creation. You talked about the, not to sound cliche, but, I think just finding something beyond yourself. So, for me right now is my kid. I'm investing, I recently married my German wife, and her family doesn't speak English. And so I'm investing in that relationship by learning German. And I study 40 minutes a day German, and it's hard. It's a difficult language, but that I think, finding something that you can invest in that doesn't directly impact yourself, whether it be, your bank account or your character. But I think, with that indirect possibility, to me, I think that's a great way to spend part of your day every day. And, I think long-term it reaps a lot of benefits.
Yeah, for sure. That's awesome. Good stuff, man. How can our listeners get in touch with you?
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the show. Any questions, comments, or if anyone wants to chat more about directly investing into industrial real estate, just reach out. You can shoot me an email, Neil Neil at magcp. That's magcp.com, or check out our website. We got some more information on industrial sale leaseback net lease. That's www.magcp.com.
Cool. Good stuff. This was fun. I love hearing about something fairly unique and this world is, or at least I know this world. Some people that are listening probably didn't even know this world was even out there. But
Yeah.
You hear about there's so many different ways to get involved in real estate. There's so many different interesting, even within industrial space. It's not just as simple like you're going to buy an industrial property, it's even multifamily. You're not going to just buy a multifamily property. There's so many different niches within that you can be an expert in. It's just so fascinating, so cool. So it's fun to have somebody like you on that's talking about something that we haven't ever talked about on the show. I've done over 400 episodes and we've never talked about this. So
there we go.
it's pretty cool. So I appreciate you joining us. Yeah, it's been fun. And man, you have a fantastic rest of the day.
Thanks, Todd. You too.
Hey, thanks so much for listening. I appreciate you being a loyal listener. I would love to have you go on to our Facebook page and subscribe. Give us a thumbs up. Go on to iTunes or wherever you listen and give us a rating and review. Don't forget to subscribe. But your rating and review just helps us push this out to more and more people and continue to grow our audience and hopefully positively affect a ton of people out there that really need this and want this. So the other thing I've got for you is a free ebook on my website. So go on to venturedproperties.com, and download our free ebook on real estate and on syndication. And I've got some data points in there, some really good stuff for you. So I'd love to have you take a look at that. It's free. I'm not expecting anything from it. And also, look, if you want some help in multifamily, want some help learning, growing, getting your business off the ground, I would love to talk to you about what it would look like to work with me potentially and see if that's a good fit. So you can go to coachwithdex.com and check that out, and we can definitely have a call. Thanks a lot for listening. You make it a fantastic rest of the day. I'll catch you on the next episode.